You're listening to episode 156, Michelle's Story, Child Loss and the Sibling Relationship. Hello, my friends. Welcome to Child Life on Call. This podcast is a safe place for parents to share their stories about what it's like to have a child that has a medical experience, diagnosis, disease, and or everything in between. We know there's power in sharing stories, and that power multiplies when you can listen to other parents who have walked a similar path to yours. Giving and getting advice is great, but hearing how another parent navigates the complexities and nuances of healthcare is even better. As a child life specialist, my role is to support, validate, and provide emotionally safe spaces for kids and their families, and I am so honored to be on this journey with you. In addition to parent stories, we sprinkle in some expert episodes every now and again that have content for both parents and professionals in the field of healthcare, all with the mission to empower parents to be confident advocates and partners with the care team during healthcare experiences. We're so glad you're here. Hello, my friends. It is a really cold Tuesday here in Austin, and I'm recording this a couple months early. We're just kind of in the middle between Christmas and the New Year. And my goodness, the ups and downs that come with this times of year is just insane. So anyway, I am so grateful to be just here chatting with you, and am so honored to share this really beautiful conversation that I had with Michele. Michele is an early childhood parent educator who works in her own private practice now, doing workshops for families and private sessions and professionals. And her focus is on supporting parents of young children who are navigating the loss of a child. And I do want to give a trigger warning for this because we do talk about loss and bereavement a good bit. So if this is not in your heart for today, then please save it for another time or just move on entirely. But I do want to be very honest that she doesn't really speak about anything that is really sad or overwhelming, but does talk about the steps forward in grief and navigating a young child while your other one is dying. And she not only comes from professional experience, but personal experience as well, what she will share in our conversation. So I have said grateful a lot. That's kind of been my theme for this week, whether I'm feeling it or wanting myself to feel it. But I truly enjoyed and am grateful for the conversation that I had. It's going to make me a better interviewer, a better mom, a better child life specialist, a better friend, a better supporter, all just because I got to meet Michele today. So I hope this really feels like a gift that I'm able to give to you. And I hope you enjoy the conversation. Before we jump into the episode, I wanted to let you guys know that if you are a parent, a child life specialist, or professional working with children, you're going to want the hospital or physician's office or urgent care that you take your kids to have the Child Life On Call app. It is an evidence-based tool designed to empower children and families during medical experiences. And 100% of the child life specialists who have used this app believe that it can help with expanding child life's reach beyond the bedside. And 100% of child life specialists believe it helps parents feel more empowered in their child's care. Learn how to get the Child Life On Call app for your facility or doctor's office by going to childlifeoncall.com/partners.
I'm Michele Benyo. I live in Minnesota, and I am one of those Minnesotans who is supposed to live here. I love the cold. I mean, when it is, when it's 10 degrees and crisp, that's my favorite day in the whole world. I love it. So I'm enjoying this. This is a good place for me to be. We've had a really deep cold snap, and it just kind of broke today. So it's, I think, around 20 right now, which is much warmer. But yeah, and I've lived here. I've been here since I went through my journey with my son, who 22 years ago actually died of cancer, and he was not quite 7, and his sister was 3.5 when he died. And I was an early childhood parent educator in the program called Early Childhood Family Education that we have here in Minnesota in every single school district for preschool age children and their families. And so that was kind of my world as a parent educator when I was confronted with this aspect of parenting little ones that I, was just not prepared for in spite of my master's in family education and the schooling I had. Ended up on this detour that that none of us ever want to be on. And that has just really shaped my professional and certainly my personal future since 2000 when my son died. So that the work I do now is with families that are raising young early childhood aged bereaved siblings who, in our case, we had a 2.5-year journey before my son died. And I think many of your guests have had these kinds of, illnesses and bereavement as a result of an illness or a disease or something that really impacts a family in a different way even than a sudden loss does, both of them, of course, being just utterly devastating.
Yeah, I so appreciate, there's 2 points that you've already brought up that just make complete sense to me. And one is that when you're thrown into this world of kind of like a medical crisis or a healthcare crisis with your child, whether you're an accountant or the president or, the director of a hospital or an early childhood educator, you're transported into parent mode, mom mode.
Yeah.
And so all of that information that you have, while helpful on your work day, doesn't always, make that big of an impact when you're just questioning everything and so exhausted. And the second part I'm so glad you brought up was this element of your son and your daughter and their relationship and the impact, because as I said before we started recording, there's not a day really that goes by that I'm not having a parent say, well, what about siblings and how do I keep them engaged and what do I need to look for? And how does it feel for them, what they're going through? So I'm so grateful that you're going to talk a little bit about how you navigated that as a parent and now how you do helping other families.
Yes. Yeah. That was something I was focused, of course, on my daughter so clearly because I was working in that age group of both of my children. And so I think I had that unique perspective going into this journey of just being so aware of where she was as well as he was developmentally and the huge impact that had on her identity of self and all of that was happening at that age. But I've also since then just learned so much that I never would have dreamed of about the sibling relationship for any siblings and how deeply that impacts the living child growing up without a sibling, no matter when they lost that sibling, but particularly when my daughter was 3.5 when her brother died. And then I thought, and she said to me when her brother died and she was 3.5, she said, "Mommy, half of me is gone." And I knew that was a true statement and how much, how amazing that at that age she was able to articulate her loss in that way. But it really got my attention as a mom and as an early childhood professional that, oh my gosh, half of her is gone. Her identity's been torn apart and she has her whole lifetime ahead of her. And what I've learned in my work since then is that indeed that loss didn't just impact her then. She's now 26 and it still impacts her. And over the last, 22 years since her brother died, I've seen at different points in her life how this loss of her sibling has deeply impacted her and who she is and how she interacts socially. So that was something I had not a clue about. When I went into this journey, I had not a clue about any of this, even, you know, how to grieve myself, let alone how she would be grieving. So it's been a huge learning curve for me.
I love that perspective. I mean, she's just so wise to say that at 3,
Yes,
but you know, in the mind of and in the development of a 3-year-old, it truly feels like, you know, we say it maybe figuratively as adults, right? Half of me is gone.
right.
My heart is broken, all of these things. But
Hmm.
she literally felt that is what it sounds like being 3 years
Yes,
old and saying that out loud.
yes, absolutely. And I think I shared with you too that the other thing that got my attention early on in our journey was the fact that when her brother was diagnosed at the age of 4.5, she was 15 months old. And they were very, very close. They were best of friends. They mutually adored each other. He adored her. She adored him. They were very close. And of course, we had, they were together all of the time. The first night that he was at the hospital overnight, and his dad was in the hospital with him, and I was home with her, and she started wandering around the house just wailing. The sound that she was making was alarming to me. It was inhuman. And she wandered upstairs and downstairs and to David's bed and to the garage door leading, out from the house to the garage. And I'd go up and try to comfort her, and she'd push me away and throw herself on the floor. She was just despondent that her brother was gone. And she knew, of course, from what had been going on in our family since we had learned that our son had cancer, she knew something was terribly wrong, and she was just feeling it with every cell in her body. And so that was right away that very first night.
As you were saying that, I'm just envisioning my 4 and 7-year-old who are inseparable, right? And, you know, they're
Yeah,
sleeping in the same room at time in the same beds. And just that
yeah,
immediate separation that you and your husband are having to navigate must have been really
yeah,
difficult.
yeah. So yes, and so we that also just kind of led us to make the decision that we were going to keep her with us as much as possible.
Mm.
We live in a cul-de-sac. There are other families with young children. Anyone would have been happy to take care of her, give her lots of love. She would have been safe and well cared for, but we just knew from that first night when she was so distraught about being away from her brother, and that was such an important relationship to both of them. And we were in Children's Hospital, where they have the wonderful child life specialists who are there to take care of the siblings as well as the child who's ill. And so we, for 2.5 years, when my son was going through his cancer journey, we took her with us to the hospital as much as possible. And we just, she was in his room with him. She sometimes saw hard things. Of course, we tried to keep her from the hardest things, but still, she saw other children, with bald heads and tubes, and he was that way. And there were times when he hurt, but she was just a comfort to him. She was, this became her. She went through those years that we refer to as the terrible 2s and 3s, being in the hospital, with her brother, developing this relationship that she never would have even had that relationship with her brother if we had not brought her with us to the hospital. And so she was able to develop that relationship that made her truly feel, after 2.5 years, that half of her was gone when he died. But we knew this was a good decision for her and for us, and it's something that I do share with parents, because a lot of parents' first reaction is, I don't want my healthy child to be exposed to that, to the hospital where kids are hurting and things don't look normal. And, and back then, this was, as I said, 22 years ago, she had quite a bit of freedom in the hospital as a sibling, and I think hospitals are maybe a bit different now, especially in light of the pandemic that we've been going through. So it was a blessing that she was able to be there with him as much as she was, and she adjusted well to that. We feel like that also prepared her very well for the reality that her brother wasn't going to grow up with her and that she was going to lose him. So that was a decision we made, and I think it was certainly the right one for us.
I very much appreciate, how you're kind of explaining that this is really clearly worked well for you. And it was your gut instinct as parents to say, this is going to be the decision we make moving forward. And, I think as other parents are listening and maybe they didn't include a sibling, like you guys did, or that was their gut decision in that moment. And that's what felt right. And we're going to come to these moments where you feel like, I did it wrong, or maybe I should have more, but that's not really what we're talking about, because then what they did was trust what they felt was right. And that means that was right for their family.
Right. Yes. And we had only 4 of us, it was like 3 of us would have been in the hospital and 1 of us wouldn't have been. And that's different than if you have more extended family, if you've got other kids, or there are just lots of reasons to make different decisions. But
absolutely.
Yes, as I say, that worked for us. We were able to do that, and it worked well. The other thing that that you're kind of referring to, that I just was so keenly aware of, was throughout the whole thing, throughout the illness. And then after my son died, when I was dealing with the grief and my daughter, having her whole lifetime ahead of her, when she said half of her was gone, was this idea that I didn't know how to do any of that, not the illness, not the grief, before I was faced with it. And so, none of us are. And so when I started having to make choices and decisions, I was second guessing myself often and always. But one of the things that I share with parents when I work with them is how free some people are to tell us what they think we should do. And they don't know. We know that. As the parent, we know that. We know how to go through the grief. We know how to go through the hardship. We have child life specialists. We have professionals that are helping us care for our family that can give us some insights. But there isn't just a single right way for a family to make this journey. And one of the things that I think is important, and I think, it's a lot why you're doing what you're doing, Katie, with your podcast, is just letting others know that you have some wisdom that you can trust. And certainly for parents, I just really want them to hear that and know that there isn't a right way to do it, even though sometimes people try to tell you that there is.
Oh, I think that's wonderful. It's like you take in, you can take it all in, you can hear it, but it really comes down to what you know to be true for yourself, your well-being, and your families. What I love, though, about your experience is this permission you gave both your daughter and your son to have this unique experience and relationship. And you mentioned this a little bit, but just, gosh, your son got to really know his sister and love his sister and wasn't separated from that. And, having a boy and girl myself, their relationship is so treasured to each one of them. And so that's something that you really gave your family, which I think is beautiful. And I'm sure at times the easier decision would have been to leave little sister at home so you could get things done and, continue about the treatment plan like you may have wanted.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And she, at her little age, was often a comfort to him, and was, a connection to him when you talk about what the parents need to do with our responsibilities and decisions and care making that we're doing and coordinating with other professionals. she was the one that could always be the connection with her brother no matter what else was going on around. So, that was a really a huge role that she played just by being who she was, just by
Right?
being the
Just by
little
being
sister.
exactly who she was.
Hmm.
You alluded to it a little bit about it's almost like the analogy of when kids grow up on farms and they see animals reproducing all over the place, that kind of
Hmm.
sex talk, the birds and the bees talk doesn't have to be
Hmm.
as important because you're watching it happen and unfold. And it's kind of the
Hmm.
analogy, and it's not the best one, just the one I can think of right now, for your daughter, seeing things worsen, seeing her brother get sick. How did you face that conversation with her as he neared the end of his life?
That is such a good question, because it's another area where we as adults who never, we've not faced this, we don't know how to do it, where we just start to worry, am I doing the right thing? And one of the things was the fact that she was with us so much. She was privy to some of the conversations and the reality of what was happening in a way that she wouldn't otherwise have been. And so when we started to realize that her brother, he ended up having, two relapses. He went through two courses of treatment after the first one, which was a year. Things looked good. His cancer had retreated, it had responded, it was gone, everything was clear. But it was just 2 months later that he started to feel discomfort. And we all kind of knew that his cancer was back. In fact, he had gotten so clear that the doctor kind of doubted that was what was happening. But his cancer kind of came back with a vengeance. And then we went through another course of treatment. He got one of the first stem cell transplants at Children's Hospital in Minneapolis. He
Wow.
had 6 weeks of radiation therapy every morning, where we had to totally sedate him because he would become a cheetah and he would not be constrained. He was fighting this when he became a cheetah. So for 90 seconds of radiation, we had to totally sedate, totally put him under, every morning for 6 weeks. He had higher dose chemo that, just really ravaged his little body the way the other chemo hadn't. And then even after all of that, his cancer came back again. And so we knew that we were going to lose him. And he said he didn't want to go back to the hospital. And we said, you're not going to, honey, because there was nothing else they could do for him. So we knew this, and we knew the timing of it. And I had to learn to say that my son was dying. I had to learn to use that word and let my daughter know that her brother was going to die and what that meant. And that's, I think, for a lot of us who have children who die, that's, and then have siblings remaining, or anyone who dies when you have young children, is using that word and letting them experience the reality of what it means to die, which is, that their body stops working. They can't do any of the things they used to be able to do. They can't talk to you or play with you or laugh with you. He's not coming back. Those kinds of things. And those are important things for us as adults to learn with children that are faced with losing something, or, a pet or a family member that they love. With her, it was more of a gradual conversation, especially in those later days when he didn't go back to the hospital and he was home with us, and she saw him. One of the pictures that I have that is just so heartbreaking is him lying on the bed and he's out of it. He's got just pain medication pumping through him, and she's sitting there with a book, kind of pretending to read to him while he's just there in the bed. And so she tried to play with him and he couldn't play the same way anymore. And, she saw the deterioration, and she, so it was a gradual process. And that's part of why I say we're glad that we made the decision to have her with us, because she saw this decline. And just kind of as an anecdote, we went on a Make-A-Wish trip to Disney World, and we ended up on the plane, and this was after his first round when he was still pretty healthy. And we were on the plane with another brother and sister who happened to go to David's same elementary school, and we didn't know this family before.
Oh,
and
my gosh.
the girl, it was a big brother and a little sister, but the little sister was David's age and her brother was older. Her brother ended up dying as well, and they were at the same school that David was at. And when her brother died, the family didn't want anyone to know. They didn't want the school to know. And when David died, we wanted all the kids to know. They had seen him there. And we just were Deanna was prepared for that. She was prepared for the reality that her brother was gone and that this was sad and that he wasn't coming back. My advice to parents, and again, I don't say have this little child involved in every every procedure and every conversation and all of the heartbreak and all of that, but she certainly knew that we were on a painful journey and a scary journey, and that, and that her brother was going to die, and that was all preparation for her that helped her cope with it.
It's the word you're using, gradual, is just such a perfect descriptive word, that it's not one conversation and then you don't talk about it anymore. And it's also not, right off the bat, he's going to die. There's little pieces and little nuggets, and whether that's, visual that she's seeing it, or conversations or feelings, it's a gradual approach. And I feel like, whether it's death or surgery or any kind of really difficult scenario, that approach makes it for an easier impact. And it's a journey together rather than kind of this, let me sit down and tell you what's happening. It's that collaborative journey that you're feeding off of each other.
Yes, and I love that, because I think that is so important. It's going through it together. And that, whether the child is the healthy child is coming to the hospital with you or not, they're going through it with you. And so to keep them apprised of what's happening, because kids experience a lot of fear when things are like this are going on in their family. And if they're not aware, if they're not being given information of any kind, the other thing that we thought about Deanna going with us was all the time that we would be away and she wouldn't be with us, she would be wondering what's happening. She would see us come back and be, she would see the tension and the just the heaviness of what we were experiencing, and she wouldn't have any understanding of it. And that is more scary for a child, that unsettling sense of security, or, that unsettling sense of insecurity that they have by not knowing, than what they feel when they know, even if what they know is difficult. So much of that uncomfort is in us as the adult not wanting to burden the child. And so we do that. We keep that information from them out of the best of intentions, but it really can contribute to the child feeling more anxious because they don't know what's going on. So yes, and then it can be gradual. I talk to parents about even just using teachable moments to talk about loss and death in ways that have nothing to do with, the personal family experience, like seeing a dead bird on the sidewalk and talking about, why the bird looks that way and why the bird can't move, and, some of those kinds of things as well.
I think I've just the way that you're articulating this is so amazing. I feel like when parents are getting to meet you through your work, they just feel like they're getting a hug and they have somebody who's saying, you know what, you're going to get through this, and I can help you through
Yeah.
it. Oh, it makes me teary. You're so wonderful. I want to get to
Oh.
your work because I want people to know what you do and what you offer, but I'm curious, and as much as your daughter allows you to share, she's an adult, but how is she doing now? And you mentioned some of these points throughout her life that you saw this, the grief come out at different times. Are there a couple stories that you can share with us?
Yes, I guess kind of the two things that come to mind for me are when she was 3.5 when her brother died. He was in kindergarten when he died. And when she went to kindergarten, and she was a September baby, so she ended up going to kindergarten later, being an older kindergartner, because, they usually, her birthday was after the start date. So she was, about 2.5 years after her brother died, she started kindergarten. And on picture day, I got a call from the school that Deanna was really very sad. She was having a hard time getting her picture taken because she was realizing that this was the age her brother had been when he died. So every time I look at his kindergarten picture and I see my son that was going to die that year with this big smile on his face and his bald head. And then I look at her kindergarten picture and I see this sad little sister who was remembering her brother. And so, just some of those really simple experiences along the way. She had to go to a new school when she was, sometime like in 3rd grade. I think she was going to a new school and that went through 5th grade. Or no, well, I don't know. She was going to a new school one year in elementary school, and she said to me, Mom, what grade would David be in if he were still here? And I said he'd be in 5th grade. And she said, oh, good, then he'd be in my school with me. And that gave her this sense of comfort that he would be in the same school. And I thought, but honey, he's not here. But she was still thinking in terms of, would my brother be with me during this transition if he were here? And the fact that she thought he would be gave her comfort. And that is a thing that I think, I certainly have learned, is how this relationship can give the living sibling so much comfort, because the relationship continues even though the sibling has died. Death ends a life, but it doesn't end that sibling relationship. The other part of the story that I would share is how difficult it was for her to, especially in middle school, which is a tough time for kids anyway, to have social conflicts and not have her brother there to be on her side, or to have friends that had siblings and she didn't. And she would go to their home, as she got older, she would see siblings with more developed sibling relationships, and she never got to develop that relationship and have her brother there to be her ally. We live next door to a family of 4 kids. One was my son's age, one is my daughter's age, and then there are 2 younger ones. And she's spent her whole life growing up next door to this family, these 4 siblings, when she didn't have a sibling. And so all of these things, when she went to college, she was in a poetry writing class. College was a big one for her. And in her poetry writing class, she wrote an anthology of poems that she titled every poem is a dead brother poem. And so, that relationship and that loss has just been a part of her life throughout, in the way that she did social relationships, also in the way that she understands people who are having a hard time. She has a great deal of compassion for that and sees what may be underneath that behavior, because that was her a lot of times, having difficult friend behaviors because she just wanted someone to be hers, and she didn't have someone that was hers. And so, she had social challenges for that reason sometimes. So these are just some of the things that I saw in her and that I would have never understood without raising her. And now she is just she's such a loyal friend. She's such a compassionate person, and is constantly adjusting my perspective about someone when, I may see behavior that I don't appreciate. She always brings that other perspective of what may be underneath that we need to understand and have compassion for. So she grew up with a wisdom that she gained from that really hard experience as well.
I can imagine that a lot of parents wonder, how is this going to impact my living child, and will their entire life be sad? And what you just described is a young, healthy adult who is wise and compassionate and kind and can discuss topics with her family and bring other perspectives. And truly, that's really right. That's the gift that we want to give our kids. And so, not in spite of what happened to her brother, but because of her brother, she has developed into this really incredible human. And I hope that gives just a little bit of peace to other families.
Yes. And that really is the point, Katie, of the work that I do. It's I come from this parenting background as an early childhood parent educator. So the thing that I want to help families with is just the wise ways to parent from our heart. A lot of the emotional intelligence and emotion coaching that is part of healthy parenting for any child, and then informing that by the fact that you're carrying grief forward, because your grief doesn't go away. You learn to live around it. And then just recognizing that, as you say, we can still be happy. I so often ended up with my daughter just having to say, and I would say to her, we're on an adventure. We don't want this, but this is what we have. Because I ended up also splitting from my husband soon after our son died. So he stayed in her life, but she was with me most of the time. I was pretty much a single parent. So there were many times I was thinking, this is just not what I want for my daughter. I want her brother here with her. I just still to this day have my temper tantrum moments where I just think it's not okay that she doesn't have her brother, but this is what we have. And so this has to be as good as it can be. And that's the perspective, and recognizing that it can be. And so I really want parents to recognize that their parenting and just their acknowledgement of who their child's emotions and all of the things that typical kids do, even when they haven't experienced loss, how we can parent in ways that accept those difficulties and help kids learn about themselves and how to manage their own emotions and how to go through loss in ways that acknowledge it as part of life, but something that doesn't have to be a final verdict on our life. And that was the thing I thought, that's not, she's 3.5. It's not okay that her life's not going to be okay. That's just not the option we're going to buy into. And so that really is the message, that there can be different positives. It's not what I wanted for her. I wanted her brother with her. But if he's not with her, then I want her to have the best that she can have from what she was dealt, from what she did have. And that's possible for every family. And I am just so saddened when I'm in a Facebook group, for example, of bereaved parents, where parents are saying, I can never be happy again. My child died 20 years ago, and I can never be happy. That is really such a heartbreaking response to loss that I just don't believe anyone needs to settle for. You really can. We don't want. And the other thing about the grief is there's not a time frame when you have to move on or get better. You are welcome to grieve and feel the pain. In fact, it's good for us to do that as long as necessary. You don't have to get all, okay, I'm going to just pull myself up by the bootstraps and move on and not acknowledge this. That's not the point. The point is to find some good things and strengths that you can pull out of it, and ways that you can look at what you've experienced and give something to the world out of that. So that just really is what I want to help families do with the work that I do.
I love that. And the work that you do with families, is it through sessions, and where do you typically, how can people find you if somebody listening right now is wanting more from you, which I imagine is happening?
Yes. My website is called Good Grief Parenting. My program is called Good Grief Parenting. And as I said, it's all framed in the idea that when we experience the things with our young children that we just don't want to have be a part of our family or a part of their life, there are ways that we can parent that enable them to build resilience and learn how to bring positive outcomes out of really unpleasant, painful situations, because we all have to face that. And so I have a 1-year coaching program that I do called Good Grief Parenting. I have had a course that I offer that's called See Your Way Forward After Child Loss, that just kind of helps families get oriented to a hopeful point of view, a point of view that says, my dreams are shattered, they're stolen, but I can find new, bright possibilities to live forward toward. And I talk about living forward. That's the thing I want to help families do. I welcome anyone to find me. I have a LinkedIn link, which is the thing we all have now, with several different options in there. And it's just Linktree/Good Grief Parenting. Anything that someone wants to reach me through, they'll find me at Good Grief Parenting, and I'm happy to schedule a call with people to just help them walk through some things, answer some questions for them. I'm always available for that. So, but I work primarily with parents in a group coaching program where we just really work through and share with other parents, because that's the other piece that I think is so important for families, is to have other parents to talk to about what they're experiencing. Because it's all different than mine. Mine is one perspective,
right.
As you know, because you've had so many conversations, that every perspective is unique.
It is. It's the generosity that you offer from yourself, right? I'm sure going back to the hardest part of your life is now never easy, but well practiced, and so incredibly important for others. So I thank you for taking us back to that today. And I also thank you for your wisdom and your advice, because I hope families go and sign up with you. But even if they don't, this is a step in the right direction, as you say, one step forward.
Yeah.
That I think you've given a ton of good tips and suggestions for putting that first foot forward. So thank you so much. I've enjoyed talking with you, and so grateful that you're here.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. And I just do want to say I didn't mention my Good Grief Guide. I actually do have a free publication called the Good Grief Guide available on my website. So if people go to goodgriefparenting.com, they can get that there. And it's got some really good specific tips for how to talk to young children and have some of these difficult conversations and interactions when the whole family's feeling a lot of pain. So so I hope people will go get that as well.
Right. And not only the parents who listen, but child life specialists who, provide free resources to families. This is a great example for that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Child Life On Call podcast. The only reason this podcast keeps on going is because of you and listeners like you. So please join in on the conversation with us on Instagram, Facebook. I'm even on TikTok now, y'all, making a fool of myself. I haven't danced yet, but maybe it's coming. You can find us at Child Life On Call. We also have a website, and that has all of our information about the Child Life Circle, about the Child Life On Call app, and a blog with new information all the time. That's childlifeoncall.com. Thank you again from the bottom of my heart for listening to these episodes and being a part of this community. We are so grateful and so honored to be able to provide this for you.